All right. So it sounds like everybody's doing all right. Austin is enjoying his new job, new to him.
Mm.
Carissa, you are doing all right?
Yeah, for the most part. Well, I mean, kind of having like almost midlife-y crisis just in transitioning with AmeriCorps ending next month. And I feel like as everything is like in a transitional phase. So that's kind of overwhelming. But other than that, the weather has been really beautiful. So just trying to spend as much time outside and figure things out as much as possible. But yeah.
Yeah, no big deal. End of AmeriCorps. No
Yeah,
big deal.
literally. And it's like I was trying to be proactive and look for and apply for jobs like in February, but a lot of the places are like for immediate hire. So it was hard to be like, well, not really until like the end of June. And now even with like a month out, I'm kind of like, I don't know what I want to like commit to. And this is like,
Yeah,
so it's just kind of like, just trying to. Today was
really.
productive though. I
Well,
found a
that's
few
good.
new job postings, so I was like, okay, there's options. But yeah,
Very good. And Robert, everything's good with the dog? You've got all your stuff?
She's been pretty good. I just got off work at 5:30 here time, I guess, here where I am. And then it's like 30 minutes, rush, 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 get everything done, then start class. My arm hurts from type. I've been working really hard at a computer.
Oh, yeah, it does get a little kind of. So
Well,
here's my
the,
hack though. You
no,
can dictate to Word.
well, I can't to these forms. There's a lot of data and
Oh,
all these. I would,
darn.
yeah. It always gets when I say something like when I say I, it says ah. And then when I say, it's just a lot of things. I don't know. But I feel like what Carissa's saying is true for me too. It's like a period of transition. It's weird. What are you going to do
Whereas
when you get time?
whereas I can't get anybody to work for me. Like I'm like begging
Oh, yeah.
this kid that just graduated. I'm like, he's 17, so I don't feel bad calling him a kid. Very smart kid. I'm like, I need to start data of you by tonight, or we have to move on. Like, I can't get people to work for me.
Yeah, it's so weird because back in the day, you'd be like, what? You want to hire me? I'm 16, 17. I can have money. Woo! Dying for that. And it's not a restaurant. Oh, great.
Yeah, it's 12 an hour. I mean, would I love to be able to pay like 15 to 20 an hour? Yes, absolutely. But we at least pay more than minimum wage, and I think 13. We bump people up to around 13 to 15 after 6 months. But 13 is like livable wage where we are in Ohio. So, but we've had the kind of opposite perspective with AmeriCorps, Carissa, where my clients, we have right now just two AmeriCorps, but we've had upwards of like half a dozen to a dozen AmeriCorps, and our work is in domestic violence, but a lot of that has to do with economic empowerment and anti-poverty. And we're like, so we're paying AmeriCorps workers like nothing, and this is not appropriate for anti-poverty economic empowerment. So we're actually trying to get rid of those positions and offer full outright paid internships.
Yeah, and I could like go over this so much, but especially I think in the last like 3 months, I have just like completely I can't even like express it in words because I'm just
Yeah.
like I think it's because I was starting to think about jobs and stuff too. But that's the thing. I'm also like I honestly part of me is like I would be happy with any like a minimum wage, and the other part's like no. We gotta like I have experience. I have this. I have that, and it's just like I think that is also all the overwhelming of like making sure all of that is covered in your job search and
Yes.
living and blah 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 blah. And it's just like it's personally it's
It's a
also just
lot.
been very hard to like do recruitment for the last few months, seeing like people who are very qualified and eager for these positions, and I'm just like burnt out from doing it
Yeah.
for remotely for a year also. I
And
think
yes,
definitely is
Austin,
like,
yeah, it's very frustrating. I completely understand. And Austin, yes, you are correct. AmeriCorps is the definition of irony. And I should be careful in what I say because on our board of advisors is the founder of AmeriCorps.
wow. Let's see.
So
Let's
right on
see.
the Eastern University server is a recording where we're not so positive about AmeriCorps.
Well, a gold Cadillac or something. Hi. I'm just kidding.
Well, and it's interesting because the Corporation for National Community Service that oversees AmeriCorps has had like zero raises in budgets over the past few decades. So it's like, I'm not surprised that it's at the level that it is in terms of reimbursements for AmeriCorps, but at the same time, it is ironic.
Well,
Yeah, I was just
Well, yeah, go ahead. If I were you, I'd just shoot for like government jobs. I mean, you've got a lot of
This is
that's
true.
government. You're very qualified.
Pension.
And that's like honestly was one of the reasons why I first looked into it. But then after my service year, like I feel like my interest kind of changed and I just had more experience doing stuff. So it's been very hard for me to like get in that mindset. I know during class a few times, like even everyone has talked about it, and I'm like sitting here like, yeah, I need to do that.
Or Austin, you had something?
well, I was just today I was like looking up because I know the whole. I saw something where I think it was Bank of America or somebody just raised their minimum wage to $25. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm in nonprofit world, and $17 an hour is what the average is in our company. And we as nonprofit people would be making minimum wage when that's raised. So like, it makes a lot of. I feel like the turnover would highly increase unless there's a change in nonprofits. Because I mean, the amount of stress we're under is crazy.
Yeah, and to say that, I mean, when you do the math and full time, if you're working 40 hours, like 35,000 at 17 an hour, but anybody in nonprofit does not work 40 hours a week. And there is a lot of call lately from a lot of different like perspectives between funders and the nonprofits themselves, and even hopefully more calls from the business sector to say that the assumption that nonprofits should pay less just because of the sector that they're in, the requirements and expertise and skills and time, when you compare an executive director, let's say, or CEO of a, let's say, $5 million nonprofit to a $5 million small business, there's no less like experience required there. There's no less dedication slash education that's required there. In fact, you probably would find more educated people in the nonprofit role there than you would a small business. But yet it's acceptable to pay an executive director of a nonprofit less because of the sector that they work in when there's even more required of them. So that's a little bit of a soapbox for me too. No, I'm not screaming and talking really fast. In that the assumptions, especially by funders, that, oh, we'll pay you, oh wait, your program costs $500,000, but we'll pay you $250,000, for your program costs, but we're not going to cover overhead or we're not going to cover staff. And what I increasingly am telling clients and other nonprofits is that when you have a funder that only pays program expenses, that they don't pay for and don't recognize personnel as a program expense, and they don't recognize overhead as a true actual cost to a program, I say don't apply anymore and tell them why you're not applying. Because the more you say ask for funds from those funders that don't acknowledge the requirement to keep those programs running, the more that you're helping them perpetuate this falsehood that nonprofit employees are less than, can be paid less than, and are less important, in addition to a whole other batch of things about overhead expenses and whatnot. And your overhead should be less than 25%, which is also bupkis. So yeah, I keep telling organizations don't apply. When they say they won't pay for operating, they won't pay for personnel, don't apply. So I'll get off my soapbox.
No,
We'll talk about followership.
I like that soapbox, and I think it's important to keep saying that because there are other workers like myself who are in more affluent, neighbor, I could say, communities, and it's all based on that. Yet, those communities, a lot of the workers that work there, they can't afford to live there. So it's like it's very bizarre. So I completely agree. There's a big disparity, and oftentimes, regardless of political affiliation, there are people who are waving the banner of equality or equal, all sorts of things. Yet when it comes down to paying, that's really where it comes down to.
Yeah, this organization that I'm working with, we're trying to improve living situations, and yet the people that are helping them, that are paid advocates, that are paid staff, make minimum wage. Like in an area where like a livable, nice wage may be like 12, 10, like in a rural area where the cost of living is lower. But we're not paying them a living wage across the board, regardless of location and what that might be and what's applicable to like their county or their city. So that's been our biggest kind of push, is to say until we can get all of the staff of the entire organization / coalition to be paid equitably and equally according to skill and what have you, then there's no way that we're ever going to make a dent in our mission towards a violence-free state, because there are so many things that are perpetuated by poverty. So it's a never-ending cycle. So that was a positive note there to start with. Sorry for that spiral, y'all.
How was Philly? That's what I wanted to know.
Do what now?
How was Philadelphia?
Oh, Philly. Philly was great. Philly was awesome. It was very surreal. Had to do graduation in a mask and socially distancing outside. And of course, the CDC is like, if you're outside, you don't have to do that all. It was good. It was good. Philly was good. Took my mom, road tripped. Got to wear the hideous graduation costume that you have to wear. Yeah, as a parting gift, they gave us nice masks. So, yeah, I guess if that's a benefit, I don't know. So it was a good trip. Thanks. Finally done, if that's what you want to call it. Done. Yeah. I guess I can be fully acknowledged as a doctor now. I don't know if that's how it works or not. Yeah.
You did all that work and paid all that money for a mask.
I know, right? It's like a really expensive piece of paper and a really expensive mask and then of course you have to pay for your graduation stuff on top of, your tuition and everything. I'm like, man, my cap and gown cost almost as much as my wedding dress. If that gives you, yeah, $860 for PhD cap and gown. So think carefully about your education choices. You can rent though.
Like in a suit or something. Like, here you go, y'all. What? I don't know.
Is that for the ruffled sleeve?
You can't wear that anywhere.
Yeah.
It's like gold cap and
Yeah.
gown.
It's like the big poofy sleeves, Austin. Yeah, with the stripes and all that kind of stuff. And I told my mom, I was like, you know what? I'm sleeping in this tonight.
It looks like the villain from The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yes, it does. Pretty much. That nailed that right on the head. Yep.
You gotta add the ring. And then...
Yeah, it's redonkulous.
Sell it to some other graduating person first.
You can't. Well, you can't, and you can. Like it's tailored, and no one else I know is under 5 feet. So I'm kind of SOL. There's no reuse. But I am going to the Future Generations graduation, and I think there's going to be 3 people in person next month, and then 3 virtual. So I'll get to wear it for that. It's like, yeah, I'll go drive 7 hours to Franklin, West Virginia, so that I can wear this god awful hideous thing that looks like, I told my mom, I'm like, this looks like a moo. It really does. It looks like a moo. So a really expensive velvet moo. It's great. All right, y'all want to talk about fellowship for the next 38 minutes now that we've talked about all these wonderful things, but it's nice to catch up with folks. And I think half of us, like at least half of us after 5 o'clock, are a little punchy anyway. All right. So, all right, followership. What do you think so far? Between the reading, between video last week, what do you think so far? Cheep, 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 cheep. You can also say it's a bullshit concept too. Like you seriously can disagree. Just because somebody's written about it doesn't mean it makes it valid. The longer nobody talks, the more awkward this gets.
I realized I wasn't even logged into Moodle. I got distracted by when you asked how it was. So I was just going to look for the article so I could have something to base
I'll share
my
on Steam
discussion
too.
off of. Okay.
That's just to get us started. I do have more
Yeah.
in-depth questions. So if the what are your thoughts so far is a little too broad, I can certainly dig a little deeper. There we go. We'll do this share here.
Yeah.
See if that helps. All right. So followership, maybe I should ask you all, do you think this is fake, real, totally valid, total bullshit?
Is it like it could be in maybe different sectors that it would be? I don't know if I want to broaden it to like certain sectors of jobs or careers or anything, or just like the type of person or like what the employee or follower prefers, and like what's most effective. Because I feel like, or maybe like I think there could be times where it's definitely effective, but then I think you also kind of have to know like when is it being micromanaging, when is it not being productive, when is it, like overbearing in a sense that it's not working, and like because I think that idea like pretty early on, the idea of like, oh, everyone following are like the sheep of doing things, like obviously that seems more negative, and it can be because it's but then I feel like there also are people who might like to have, tell me exactly what to do it, and then just like keep repeating that. And like I used to think I liked that, but I think the more work experience, and then leading off of like the supervisors I had, because I know we've talked about like the different types of leadership too, like maybe even there are certain people that like, well, we know that there are people that shouldn't have followers in as strong capacity as they do, but then more of like, and I think maybe in the class when we talked about like mentoring and coaching, and I forgot the other one, which might have just been like leading. I think that's a really important aspect, and rather than exactly like copying and doing every single thing, more if it were more of a role like that. So like that's kind of the part where I'm calling BS of like, then you're not really giving anyone the opportunity to become their own independent like person or worker.
And I think what you will find, so I brought this slide up to you from the video from last week, is that either when there's the assumption of a follower role or a follower chooses the type of follower that they're going to be, and it's I'm just going to do what I'm given and told versus, and I am not an active participant in the conversation. I am this lovely passive like follower. So that person that you might label or call a sheep falls into that category of I'm just here to do a job. I am not the leader. I am not the supervisor. Um, I just am doing what is told here. That's that passive. And in many cases, there is nothing wrong with that, right? It's sometimes it's a job, it's a role, it's what I got to do and what I got to use it for. With other areas being very different from that. So I think what is frustrating, I think to you probably, is the concept of followership and I have to do exactly what somebody tells me to do, which is not all of what followership encompasses. In fact, most of it isn't. Now, if you want to be that person that says, I just want to go to my job from 8 to 5 and I want to go home and not have to think about my job, then that's like a perfect situation for many people, and being a passive follower is what's appropriate for them. So I think you being an educated and experienced person is what kind of calls BS on that, is to say, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to sit there and 100% have somebody tell me what to do and what to say and how to participate and engage. Other takes on followership.
I mean, I saw the perspectives, and I kind of expected some of these, some of this analysis, and I was being quiet so that I could be the follower for once, and not be the one to be talking. But I think some of it, in my mind, I kept thinking about genetic components that aren't. I don't know if it's very difficult. We were just at the surface of analyzing what genetically determines some of the dynamics of our behavior, such as following versus leading as it's perceived. And I also think about, and I know this, I don't want to be controversial, but I also think about IQ level. I think that someone, and that wouldn't be me, but somebody that's very, very intelligent, I mean, talking really, really intelligent, could be in a kind of a hell if they're put in a position where they're not creating, they're not fulfilling their potential. And I think a good model of followership would be something which allows for growth. You know, we talk about upward but not just scaling in terms of scaling the pay grade or even responsibility, but coming, you know, you look at an orchestra or something. You know, I happen to love classical music. You look at an orchestra and you could see individuals that are just absolutely amazing, right? And they're not following; they're sort of leading their own self development, their own potential. So models, what I read, kind of I expected. Okay, so, and then again, you get introspective. Which one am I? The past. Sometimes, I mean, we're all kind of. I would say for me, I'm a few of these at some point.
Yeah, I think what you will find is that you are like, if you are not the leader, whichever leadership type that is, you will not always be the same kind of follower based on situations. I mean, there have been plenty of cases where I'm like, you know what? I don't want to have to make a decision. I don't want to have to figure out what the next thing to do is. I don't want to be strategy. I just want you to give me an assignment. I do my work and I move on. Which those are usually like situations where I'm like, I don't want to be here anymore, and my level of engagement in the organization is like, I'm just here to do my job. I'm going to do it and I'm not going to cause any ripples. And that's when a situation serves its purpose, usually, right? Is when you find yourself in that lower left hand corner. But the other times when you are very excited about a project, you aren't the leader of it, but you are very excited, you are completely engaged, you are empowered to make decisions. You are empowered by the leader to work with them to figure out next steps and are very much involved in those. Then that totally puts you in that upper right hand corner where you are excited, even though you're not the leader, and you are helping move something along and move the football down the line. So I don't think you're going to be one kind of follower in every situation. It's going to be very situational dependent. But yeah, followers aren't cheap. That's my biggest thing with that one. And I go through all of these with our with that video from last week, but and y'all can watch that too. But um, there was something I had on the tip of my tongue, but it has been lost. So I will dive into this article too. I've got a few questions, and we'll see how far we get in the next few. So the idea, so this really kind of grinded my gears a little. This idea that some leaders might feel as though someone is a follower, or in general, like their perspective of followers is that someone isn't a leader then because they have a lack of capacity or are not willing to take a leadership role. So either you can't or you won't be a leader. So I'm kind of curious, how or why would somebody have this perception? Why would, and whether they're, it doesn't matter who they are, but why do you think somebody would think this way of a follower or someone who might be labeled as a follower? If you're not a leader, you have a lack of capability or willingness to assume a leadership role.
Because you're asking from the person who believes in followership perspective?
No, not necessarily.
Or,
Like,
okay.
why would somebody have this perspective, or why can you imagine that someone would say this?
Because they're scared of being a leader is the first thing that comes to mind, like more psyche based, or could also be just like an ignorance to the position or leadership. And I'm also trying, and I also just think like, they might just not want it to be a leader in a formal way, which I think we might have talked about before in previous classes. That's kind of what comes to mind.
Yeah, from what I'm reading here, it looks like they assume that the leadership role equals capability, and it doesn't necessarily equal because I've had some really bad leaders, or at least by title.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that it's saying like, it's like the assumption that if you're poor, you're lazy. Like I feel like it's the same thing. If you're the follower, then you must not be capable of leading. It just may be the fact that that's where your role is right now. So yeah.
I agree with all of what you all said, especially the part that has to do with this. This is an assumption. This is right there, based on a worldview of how leadership is, and leadership doesn't involve. And from this point of view, it's just a worldview, a point of view. If you're not gunning for the leadership position, then what are you doing here?
Right. Well, and last time I checked, there's not space for everybody to be a leader in every context, in every situation, right? And something was brought up too this morning, and I completely agree, that we have placed leadership on this level of, well, everybody has to do that. Everybody has to have a leadership role. And if you don't, then something's wrong with you. Like we've put leadership at such this level, and who was it that mentioned their summer camp? I think it might have been Grace. That they're teaching like leadership skills and leadership this. I mean, Girl Scouts is completely guilty of it too, that we're building leaders for tomorrow, and nobody wants to say, or it doesn't sound sexy, right? Of like, we're building the followers of tomorrow. Right. So, but at the same time, there's plenty of leadership opportunities, and the work doesn't get done without people that are following a leader. So I think it might be kind of grandiose to say that everybody gets to be a leader. Well, not everybody gets to be a leader because there aren't that many opportunities. Some people aren't suited for it. That's just not their time, kind of the opposite of what you just said, Austin. Oh, well, if you're not a leader, it's not your time yet. You're not ready yet. You haven't cooked enough. I know some 8-year-olds that are more capable of being a leader than some 50-year-olds. So Um, it just depends on what the situation requires, right? It's very situational and who steps into which role. Yeah, there's sometimes a power struggle, but a lot of this kind of perspective, the willingness and capability, just because somebody doesn't want a leadership role doesn't mean that they can't. It's kind of that question of just because I can doesn't mean I should. Same thing goes with leadership. It's just because I could lead this or have the experience to doesn't mean that I want to or would be good at doing it. So I sometimes want to take leadership, the concept of leadership, and over studying leadership. I have a degree in leadership. I'm like, screw leadership. Like, that's not always 100% where it's at. It needs to be taken down a peg or two to be like, the leaders are the ones that get things done. No, they're not. No, they're not. That's why there's just all these roles. Like if the leader could get it all done by themselves, then CEOs would just be CEOs of their own world, and that's it. It takes people following that mission, following that perspective, following the idea to say, okay, we'll be all in this together. And then some of those followers, yes, are compensated for their time, skill, talent, and what they can bring to the table. So, well, some interesting perspectives. Yes, worldview of leadership, but I want to go into these three different areas of followership. So, three different roles here. We're going to kind of hit all three if we can. So first is an interactive role. So in terms of the interactive role, they talk about the equivalence of importance between followership and leadership. Leaders are just as important as followers and vice versa. So because of that, they have an active role in constructing the leadership relationship. So you can't have, like, if you think about it, you can't necessarily have a leader 100% of the time without some sort of followers. It's like the emperor kind of jam, right? Like, so somebody just marching to their own tune, and does that really make them a leader without folks supporting that mission or helping guide that mission or doing the work? Typically, no. And so followers are then empowering the leader, influencing their behavior, determining consequences as well. Like, hey, leader, if you demand, say an overbearing, micromanaging leader, how often do people still follow that? I think sometimes turnover rate says a lot about a leader, right? So somebody that may not need to be in leadership. So because of effective followership behaviors, there are 7 different things that we look for in terms of this interactive role. And I'm kind of curious, and we go through these, if there's one that you feel from either your leadership roles or when you've had to follow a leader and be part of that relationship, if there's not one or more of these, it's more important than the others. So 1, demonstrating knowledge and confidence. 2, a follower builds that collaborative relationship. Again, you can't have a relationship when there's just a leader by themselves. They defend the leader. They speak highly of them to other people. They influence the leader. So that whole concept of, hey, I'm going to, when I see something, I'm going to fix it. When I have an idea, I'm going to bring it to them, or say implement that idea if I've got enough leeway, if you will, to make that decision. So I'm going to support them any way that I can. And in that process, influence them. Maybe I give them a different perspective that changes their mind or guides them in a different direction. So this is, I think, a little of an odd one. Demonstrating proper comportment for the organization. That includes proper speech, dress, etiquette, essentially adhering to a requirement of a role, showing concern for performance, as well as being collegial. I kind of find it weird to say always friendly, because depending upon the relationship, that may not be appropriate. And then willingness to participate in necessary organizational change. So of those 7, is there one that strikes you, or 2 that strike you as more important, maybe in your current role or a former role that you think one's more important, or maybe on the flip side, one that's total bullshit and just isn't really a thing? Anyone strike you as more important or not at all important? Lowest rung on the list.
I think the building collaborative and supportive relationships is really important. And also like, depending on the position as well, the level of that and like what that means. But job knowledge and competence is like, to me, that almost kind of feels like a technical skill. So again, the way that you would talk about that is like, we only want these really qualified people as leaders, but like in a more humanistic way, like we want someone who's good at their job, and that's why we're having them show other people, the way of what to do, and like the collaborative relationship is like built with that. So it's almost like I feel like those should be like a while, like demonstrating job knowledge and experience while building relationships rather than making it two separate things in like a hierarchy. And yeah, the defending and supporting the leader role, I'm kind of calling BS on that because I understand it, but it almost like reading it over the second time, I'm like, whoa, wait, what? That's like, I mean, yes, ideally, but I'm also just thinking of like, okay, of all the bad leaders we had, that's going to be like, you have to defend and support your leader. It's like, no, you should be able to express any concerns that you have. Like, I see they're probably also thinking about it in terms of like, positive, but if it were a negative thing, then, I think there should be like the exceptions of when the leader's doing X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. Well, I think that defending and supporting piece is when they've had to make a hard decision and need some backup and trying to make it work versus they made a decision and it turned out really crappy and they know it.
Yeah.
And everybody else knows it. So yeah, definitely not showing support there. But showing support when people are like, is this really a good idea? I mean, I'm sure we've always been in that same situation where I'm like, I just need a little bit of like leeway here. Like, y'all just trust me a little bit on this. I was put in this role for a reason. Give me just a little bit of trust. And so, yeah, it is a very wide spectrum of that support piece.
I think, what Carissa was saying made me think about, unless it's a different article I was reading, but just a different groupthink and the pitfalls of leadership and all of that. So that's what made me think what she was saying. On the other hand, what you're saying makes me think of that is a component of good followership on account of if you see, let's say, sometimes the knee-jerk reaction is to resist any kind of change. Now, I'm not one of those that are going to be preaching, "Oh, I love change." I hate it when people say that because no, change is hard and we don't like changes. But if you can explain why this could make a difference, let's say a shift in the way we work or technology that we're going to use, for instance, in my job, like an upgrade in software or a different software, and then we hate that software. We know it's going to be bad because we've had such bad experiences, and yet, let's be supportive. Let's give it a chance. And then, I guess that's where I guess if it's reasonable, yeah. The defending part, sorry.
Well, I think a couple jumped out at me. So now that I think about it, I was told one time in an organization, because I was frustrated I was like, we just did 90% of the work, and the ED's the one that comes in front of everybody. It's like, oh, yay. But I was reminded though, and I was kind of checked on that because they were also like, well, yeah, but they also get 90% of the crap too. So if something goes wrong, you have to So I was essentially told, and I mean, out of context, it sounds pretty bad, but I was essentially told like you were there to make them look good. And I know that sounds bad, but I understood it at the moment. Like we're there to keep the machine running, and that way they're not getting hit with stuff all day. And because if they're the ones that the community is going to remember, and if not, then
right. As soon as something goes poorly, a client was rejected because they weren't accepted because of whatever factor, their gender, their race come to mind in particular. Yeah, probably the person, the client that dealt directly with them would be canned. But I guarantee you, if enough scandal over it occurred, the ED is the first one out the door.
Yeah.
I mean, whenever we've had a police shooting, how often is the police chief the first one out the door?
Yeah, but I hate that sometimes because like, and I totally agree. Like for instance, like when the big mess up with those, what were those airplanes that were falling out of the sky because of some software problems?
Boeing's, yeah,
What was that plane? I forget. The 730.
Supermax.
I mean, that really ticked me off. To me, it spoke of a systemic lack of leadership, a moron, not only at one level, but at many levels. And I'll use that language because people died. It's not acceptable that the technology that's been around for, I don't know what, decades and decades and decades, and they're falling out of the sky because someone didn't do some part of the job. We can't allow that. And not only should they have fired the leader, but all the darn little leaders that led up to that, you know? All yes men, especially the yes men, the bat followers, the one that were so terrified to say, "Oh, this is a bad idea," and that's what I about this article about. Well, it can become so rigid a system that nobody wants to move because they're such good followers. Well, stop it, slap.
Yeah.
But I think that's where number 4 comes into play, is exerting influence in a confident and unemotional manner to help leader avoid costly mistakes. So I feel like if everybody's doing their job, we wouldn't have that problem. So yeah, I understand.
Do your job, but it's compartmentalized.
Well, and I don't think it's so much the leader-follower relationship at that point. That's toxicity of culture and what's acceptable and what isn't. Not necessarily, oh, well, you didn't fall into line as a follower, but more so, it is not acceptable by our organizational culture for you to call out anything if it's not in line with so-and-so wants. So there is a very fine line there. What makes a follower and what makes a follower with somebody who is scared to speak out is and is not willing to come forward because they're probably going to lose their job and they don't have the same kind of security that, say, your CEO of a Fortune 500 company has. And it's hard. It's a very hard, I mean, and it's also very lonely at the top. How many people does that person get to talk to figure out things?
It's also hard, true. It's also hard because it's not only we're building a system of humans that work collaboratively, but also we work very intimately with technology, with intelligent technology that more and more kind of sequesters or compartmentalizes certain parts of a big job. If the bigger the job, sometimes the more difficult it is for all these pieces to come together and for any kind of leadership to really emerge, because it becomes abstracted. In other words, sometimes the leadership role becomes reduced, and the one at the top doesn't realize until it really everything just hits the fan, like it did with the airplane. Nobody would have sat and said, "Oh, let's make an airplane that falls out of the sky," or nobody would have said that. But an emergent property of what you said, like the toxic culture, but also just all the steps in between. I don't know. You got to make it simpler somehow. And for instance, in my job, they made an effort to make a list of things that we could, identify waste. And I think I talked about it maybe a couple of sessions before. And it's so difficult to buy into that and not be suspicious, right?
Right.
So, yes.
Well, of those 7, the one that that folks this morning had the hardest part with is number 5. So acting a certain way in compliance with the organization. So I'm going to dress the way they expect me to dress. I'm going to talk the way that they expect me to talk. When you start thinking about uniforms, and it's like Stepford followers, right?
Like it.
Yeah. So that was the one most people had a problem with this morning with was, wait, proper comportment for the organization. I'm going to follow this very rigid line of what I'm supposed to do as an employee. I'm like, a uniform is one thing, and we don't have to like it. But if we're all supposed to fit into this cookie cutter, I think that's far less now, and especially with COVID, everybody wearing their PJ pants underneath their suit jacket, like, I think the expectation has lessened. I mean, the expectation of where we were even 10 years ago, 5 years ago, has lessened from what is culturally required. Like, how many people showed up at work and even not even a full suit, but a tie and dress pants and dress shirt and skirts, and we didn't even call them slacks. We called them slacks then, or pants. Even just what we call things anymore has changed. So that's the one that folks had the most problem with this morning was like, no, don't care about that one, but we care about the relationships. We care about the organizational change. Like, change is hard, right? Change is a little less hard when you've got more people on board. Like, yeah, we're going to start taking this away. So the organization that's like, you know what, AmeriCorps has got to go. And what it took for them to make that decision, and which for them is a very huge organizational shift because it's a statewide organization. They did the math and said it costs us this much to have an AmeriCorps individual involved. Whereas if that is unrestricted dollars that we're using for that, why aren't we just employing somebody that has zero restrictions on what they can and cannot do with their time? So it literally took someone in finance to say, here's what we get, here's what we're paying out. And in addition to, of course, like what could be considered harm to some people in terms of what's required. And boom, everybody's on board with what's going to be a major shift for this organization in terms of personnel and finance and impact, program impact. Simple as that. It's crazy, right?
I mean, I knew 5 was going to be an issue.
Kind of like, you know what? It's so much an issue, I'm not even going to bring it up.
No, I mean, but I was just thinking, like, because I reacted to it again at first, but then I was like, but there's some situations where if you really want to get anything done, there's no use in trying to push against it. I mean, there's certain. I have a friend that's actually he was a pastor of a church in a rural area in like right at the line of North Carolina, South Carolina, and very traditional, very old school. So he realized if he was going to start there and make a difference and like build some trust, he was going to have to wear a suit and tie. Like, it was just going to happen. I mean, he slowly changed that, but he realized at the beginning there's some like, I work with multicultural environments, and so there's some situations where what I'm dressed like is going to affect things. And as much as I don't like that, I mean, I could wear a t-shirt and pants all day and like with a hat, but I can't. I understand where, like, I guess there can be an undue burden, I guess, with that, but I think there's some reason to it, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Sometimes, and maybe sometimes it's unfortunate, but what you have to do to get things done, and we've talked about this in like a generational context, but very much one, growing up in the South, two, growing up in like the boys club kind of thing, to get anything done, regardless of whether you're male, female, is you're going to go to the skeet weekend and you're going to drink bourbon. Like, those two things are going to happen. So either you go and you keep up, or you don't go, you lose out and may not be able to make your way through what you want in terms of decisions or change, or you want that customer, you want that client. And that's the role that has to be played. I worked with an organization, like 99% of the board was male, white male, and their like board retreats were literally like drinking bourbon and shooting skeet. So you either played that game or you weren't in the game.
Well, the thing is that we kind of make the strange assumption nowadays because we're at the tip of the present, right? And we ever since the 2000s with what that guy Zuckerberg and his FaceTime and all that stuff. Seriously, we're taking our cues from people that wear, San Francisco, they wear T-shirts and wear hats like I'm doing, all that stuff. And it feels really cool, really relaxed, man. It's West Coast, man. And it's true, it's good. On the other hand, think about this. Was it the way that was it? This does not, like the suits and the ties, that's not the past. That was the really
Recent.
yeah,
Very, very recent.
it's also what came behind it was hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years of really wild and casual behavior, and everybody people call it, I hate to say the Wild West because that wild, but in other words, people were really anyway. But there is a sorting out that happened, and then eventually, like even here in America, in the West, which I'm not in right now, but I'm still in my mind. You think people aspire to structures like the Victorians and good manners and all these kinds of things because it informs us in situations where the Native Americans, many of the tribes that I've gone acquainted, there's a protocol, there's an etiquette way of doing things, and it's informed by, hey, you know what? It's not a good idea to spit in somebody's eye, even if that's your custom. There's certain things that are just good. So if somebody were to dress, eventually, we would all like to not live with rules. But the thing is that could be your living room. I mean, at the workplace, you still have to, dress modestly. You can't wear, something provocative. And then, but I don't know. And then it gets really dicey. I see how the morning people could have gotten. I like a uniform because then I don't have to guess about it.
You don't have to think about it, right? I think that's one of the biggest like bonuses of sending kids to school with a uniform is like, you don't have to like, which of my 25 t-shirts am I going to wear today? Like, no, you're going to wear your red shirt and your khakis, or you're going to wear your blue shirt and a skirt. Like there is,
You know what the funny
you don't
thing
have to choose. You don't have to think.
I would have my stuff done by either by myself or the cleaners for 2-3 weeks at a time, and then when they changed the code at where I work, we're like all of a sudden, okay, now, and everybody used to think that I was pretty, I would say, square. Maybe I am, I don't know, but I thought that that somehow my life was just like at work, dressed in a suit, whatever it is, and really it wasn't. I love being able to take off that suit and like bam, and it's gone, and I love that my creative life, my private and friend's life was so much more, so much different. I don't know. And I don't think it made me less creative and less productive than, like oppressed in some way. And I think it does take me a lot longer. Like, why are you wearing that? Oh my God. Like it takes longer.
Yeah, you're correct, Austin. It's interesting that in lower income communities where you like everything's the same, if you've ever noticed, like you go into Aldi's, there's one brand of this and one brand of that. And so if kids only have to be bought one t-shirt or one kind of shirt and one kind of pants and you're done.
But guess what? A new uniform starts to resurface. Like I noticed at my job. Well, all of a sudden, hey, jeans, but not the cheap jeans, the very expensive jeans. Hey,
the ones that have seams in them.
Those puffy jackets, North Face one or whatever, Columbia, it had to be a brand, and all up to the they were wearing the casual, but everybody in Boulder you could see, or you could literally. I used to look and like, man, these people look, and I would use that word like followers, like sheep, derisively before this class but I would say like they look like sheep and they think they're so individualistic, but they're just creating another uniform.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I think our perspectives on followership are ever changing, right? So hopefully last week and this week imparted a different perspective on followers, and that sometimes followers not a bad thing, right? Not everybody can be in a leadership role. We all have our own place in our organizations and structures, and sometimes being a follower means speaking out. Sometimes that's being supportive. So a lot of different ways to look at followership. So I hope if you haven't read it yet, the chapter that's in here comes from one of my favorite books and some of my favorite authors, and I think really challenges this idea that everybody has to be a leader, everybody has to serve in a leadership role, and you don't. Sometimes you can be even more powerful in a followership kind of role. So all right, time flies when you're having fun, folks. So I will see you back here, same bat time, same bat channel.
Yes.
Thank you all.
We're winding down to the end. Bye.
Yeah, see ya.